Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the Voice of Reason. Today is March 6th, 2022, and we are continuing our coverage of the ongoing Russia-Ukrainian war. We are now heading into day 11 of said conflict, and the conflict shows no signs of reducing in intensity. Furthermore, it would appear that the West and several NATO nations, to include Poland and Romania, are looking now actively at supporting the Ukrainians by handing over some of their fighter aircraft, such as the MiG-29s, that the Ukrainians are trained on and proficient at their use. So we know that the Polish have several that they may hand over. In all likelihood, what we would see is I doubt the aircraft would be flown in. Now, they could be at the same time, or they could be transported over ground to the Ukrainians. Now, it's very important to look at the cost versus the benefit of providing these tactical aircraft to the Ukrainians. So first, you have to look at the prospect of what kind of damage would that do to further reduce relations between Russia and the West. And obviously, if you are providing tactical aviation assets to the Ukrainians during open war, that is only going to make things worse. And you have to look at the same time, what kind of benefit are these MiG-29s going to provide to the Ukrainians? And I would say it is probably marginal. Again, the most effective air asset right now within the course of this conflict, excuse me, is the Turkish TB2 drones that are being operated from possible airfields, but also quite possibly on roadways as well. They're much easier to hide, much easier to service, and deploy those assets against Russian military units. If you start openly supplying MiG-29s and providing those to the Ukrainians, again, that could be perceived as a act of war by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and or its members to the against the Russian Federation. And again, we do not, the world does not want to see an open conflict between Russia and the West, i.e. NATO. But that's where we're at. We continue to see calls for a no-fly zone. Again, a no-fly zone would, for all intents and purposes, be an open declaration of war against the Russian Federation. Vladimir Putin has come out and stated that both the economic sanctions that he is seeing is or could be construed as a act of war against Russia. So we're already creeping towards the realm of a high probability of open conflict with Russia. We have obviously NATO assets operating very, very close to the border with Ukraine. We know that many of the Ukrainian air defense assets are being directly supported by NATO long-range surveillance aircraft. It would be highly likely that in fact we have probably seen F-35 stealth aircraft actually may have been in fact deployed into western Ukraine to assist with some of this surveillance activity that this information is then given to the Ukrainian air defense intelligence, and they are then able to launch and or interdict Russian aircraft that could be approaching various points within the Ukraine. But again, the concept that the West, Poland, Romania, starts actively providing the Ukrainians with some of these MiG-29s is only going to quicken this journey towards a all-out conflict between East and West. And then obviously other nations at some point could very well pick sides. So I would say at the start of this conflict, if you look at the prospects of World War III, I would say 10% chance that this could escalate into something that no one has control over. I would say that with this talk of both no-fly zones and the talk of providing some of these tactical assets in terms of these fixed-wing assets to Ukraine, that is now increasing. And I think right now we probably have a 30% probability of an open conflict between Russia and the West. And again, in all probability, it is going to expand, meaning Russia is not going to be alone at some point. The Chinese could quite possibly throw in with the Russians at some point, especially with concerns about Taiwan and some other issues as well. But again, those are the risks, and those risks continue to increase day by day. They are not reducing in terms of what we are seeing, both in the ground, in the air, and in terms of the political equation as well. The military activity continues on the ground. The Russians continue to operate in a manner looking to seal Kiev off. Again, this is not going to be a short process as anticipated by members of the U.S. military, such as General Milley. Again, I had predicted that this would be a long, drawn-out conflict, and it will continue to be this sort of conflict given the capabilities of both nations. That's the Ukraine and the Russians. Again, the Ukrainians have a very capable force. They have shown to be resilient and continue to aggressively oppose the Russian operations in Ukraine. Now, with that being said, the Russians continue to operate with their doctrine, broad funnel operations, exploiting breakthroughs and the heavy use of artillery assets and multiple launch rocket systems as well, and they continue to pound the Ukrainians with both said artillery and cruise missiles. But we continue to see the Ukrainians actively shooting down Russian helicopters. I will have a overview later of reported equipment losses on both sides. I'm still compiling that information, but I will have a video on that. There has been also some discussions within the comment section on the Russian Air Force not being as effective as many thought the Russian Air Force could be. So again, the Russian Air Force is missing one key ingredient that the United States and some obviously Western nations possess, and those are the targeting pods that allow Western aircraft to loiter at great distance from a target area and observe targets on the ground with these more advanced high-resolution targeting pods that can then be utilized to direct precision-guided attack munitions towards said aim point. The Russians have very few of those, and again, it's just not in their doctrine to conduct that sort of air-to-ground warfare, be it doctrine or just the high costs of said assets. Now, the Russians do have the ability to perform precision-guided attacks. Again, those are usually done with cruise missiles or ballistic missiles, but at the same time, some of their aircraft do have that ability but they have to get a lot closer than Western aircraft. And right now, we're kind of seeing the result of that of doctrine that the Russians are using in terms of having to get much closer to ground targets to attack those ground targets than Western nation states, and that is resulting in a higher loss of Russian aircraft than you would ordinarily see with a Western operation. Again, the standoff ranges for Western precision-guided attack munitions can be over 100 kilometers in distance. And again, with both ground, air-to-ground radar and obviously the all-important targeting pods that the Western nations use, such as Lightning and Sniper, those give Western nations a distinct advantage in that sort of warfare. But again, if the Russians are aware of a target, they do have the ability to strike that target, and that's being proved by the ongoing strikes that the Russians are conducting. But in terms of real-time surveillance with the use of targeting pods, that is where the Russians are at a distinct disadvantage. And as opposed to using those systems, we are seeing now traditional Russian doctrine of enveloping or getting close to a target within 20 kilometers where their artillery units can come in and then reduce said opposing force on the ground. And we're seeing that in Kharkov, we're seeing that in Mariupol, and we're seeing that in both, we'll probably see that very near Kiev and possibly inside of Kiev at some point once and if the Russians can fully envelop Kiev. But again, that is the situation on the ground, watching this very, very closely. Right now, the most successful operation for the Russians is taking place within the confines of the operation coming out of Crimea, and this is this area right here. We believe at MFAN that the Russian Southern Military District, the forces that are located predominantly in the southern Russia, within the confines of those army groups which are deployed in the area of operation in Crimea and north of Crimea, were probably better prepared for conflict than their brethren that are operating in the north. It would appear that the army groups in the south probably trained a bit more and have better supply nodes than some of those forces operating in the north. And we know, for instance, the 4th Guards Tank Division, which is normally located near Moscow. Again, this unit is used quite a bit in parades and quite possibly doesn't see the same kind of training that some of its sister units down in the south are actively or have actively gotten in the past. We know that some of those tanks, such as the T-80U, does not have the same type of thermal optics that are deployed in other Russian units. So that is one issue right now that the Russians are trying to deal with. That may benefit some of these southern Russian military units that are operating outside of Crimea. That's not to say that some of these units in the north do not also have, meaning tank units, do not have thermal optics, but we do know that for the most part, the 4th Guards Tank Division, which is operating in the north towards Kharkov, is operating with the T-80U, which does not have thermal imaging optics. Now, with that being said, what is happening in terms of the issue with the 90th Tank Division, also deployed within this area of operation? Again, a lot of those tanks are older tanks with the 90th Tank Division. They do have some modern tanks or upgraded Russian tanks, such as the T-72B3, but we do see a lot of older T-72BV type of tanks with the older reactive armor being deployed by units such as the 90th Tank Division. But again, it just would appear that given the short period of time that the Russians staged in Belarus, was just not an adequate enough time for both some of these Eastern Russian units coming from the Eastern military districts to have the sort of situational awareness of the terrain that they were operating in, knowledge of the areas that they were operating in, unlike some of the units from the southern military district, which again are operating, they've been operating in southern Russia for some time. The Russians have set up supply bases in Crimea, so many of these units are seeing a better supply in their advance as they progress deeper and deeper into Ukraine. And again, I also believe that some of these units in the southern military districts were simply better trained than some of these show units, especially the likes of maybe the 4th Guards and the 2nd Guards based near Moscow. Again, some of these units are called elite units, again, such as 2nd Motorized Rifle and 4th Guards Tank. But again, in reality, in all probability, the units from the southern military districts probably are more proficient, have worked together longer, and are especially better supplied in terms of operating in the southern part of Ukraine. And again, the terrain also is a big issue as well. In the southern Ukraine and or coming out of Crimea, it's very flat, very open. Again, these areas are optimal for tank warfare. And I had talked about leading up to the conflict, the area to the north of Ukraine is forested, full of marshes, with intermittent urban settlements that is heavily forested, that makes it very, very difficult for armored operations. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now, unfortunately for the Russians, in its attempt to encircle Kiev. And that's why this is going to be a fairly long, drawn-out process that's going to result in fairly, quite possibly, continued Russian casualties. Again, where the Russians are going to probably end up winning this conflict is, in fact, in the south, as these units continue to be reinforced and exploit breakthroughs in the southeastern portion of the Ukraine. But that's where we're at for today. We will certainly have more soon to come. Hope everybody enjoyed the video. And again, more to come. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day.